Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Tarantino, author of Dying to See, Revelations about God, Jesus, Our Pathways, and the Nature of the Soul. You can see that on my banner above. I will place the link to purchase my book, if you like, under the video for your convenience. Now, I'd like to welcome all of you today to my YouTube channel called Exploring Everything Spiritual. Please click the like button below and feel free to share any video on my YouTube channel. And don't forget to subscribe below to see future amazing videos about everything spiritual. Today we have a special guest, Jacob Cooper, who is a clinical social worker, certified Reiki Master, certified hypnotherapist who specializes in past life regression therapy. Isn't that interesting? And works privately with clients using easily accessible online services. He has been inspired by his near-death experience and transformative encounters to facilitate spiritual awareness and empowerment through life-changing seminars, and currently resides and practices in Long Island, New York. He is the author of a newly released book called Life After Breath, published by Waterside Productions. All of Jacob's social media, his website, and his book ordering links will be added below the video for your convenience. Welcome, Jacob. Congratulations on your new book.
Thank you so much, Janet.
Great.
It's
Yes.
a true honor to be on your program here this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so nice of you to say. I see your book is doing phenomenally well, and I'm excited to hear what you have to share with us today. Would you like to tell us about your experience and what you learned?
Absolutely. Before we start, it's an honor to be here with you. You actually have the same name as my mother.
Oh.
So, which you don't find too many Janets, or, it's kind of like a rarer name. It's not out there as much these days. So, definitely have a soft spot right off the bat when I met you having that name. But
Well,
that's a segue to my near-death experience because my mother was involved in it.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So my near-death experience is an unconventional near-death experience. And saying that NDEs are becoming more conventional these days and more the household name, obviously with Surviving Death documentary that came into place, and the other near-death experiencers throughout the years who have come out of the woodworks publicly. And so it's becoming a lot more known of commodity. And as the incubation period between life and death and science and medicine is extending itself to capture that period, it's definitely becoming a lot more broad-based and wider-based, more mainstream. But what I say unconventional is my near-death experience happened at the age of 3 years old when I was in my infancy years. And before I start, the number one question that I have is, how was it possible to remember an experience at the age of 3 years old? What I would say is, first of all, I don't get any profit from this, but please watch the documentary Surviving Death. Not only is there a near-death experience segment, it's very eclectic and broad-based, but I think on the fifth or sixth segment or episode, there's actually a segment on reincarnation and children who remember their past lives. And so if it's possible for a child to remember their past life, which back hundreds and thousands of years for some kids, certainly it's possible to have recall of experiences, within this body in this lifetime. And so at the age of 3 years old, I was able to remember it from the intensified trauma that happened, which I will get into in a little bit, as well as the euphoric elements that were not of this body, of this planet, this world, but they were from the other side. And that is possible to stick with you because it wasn't produced by my own brain. It's something much more, and it was from this higher subconscious. So yes, it is possible to have memories not only of infancy years within this lifetime, but even memories far beyond this lifetime. And people throughout history have been able to recall that. As to be a high level of a Buddhist monk or something like that, you have to be able to pass a series of tests that will signify that you were, the successor that you're taking the place of, so to speak. So, and children have to pass that test. So it is indeed possible. But I had at the time, at 3 years old, pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, which for infants, children, and even adults could be fatal if left untreated. It's a highly contagious upper respiratory virus that I was not given a vaccine for. And um, it's very ironic, but I guess charted that I released my book within a time that had a lot of symmetry within the COVID, upper respiratory, situation and my,
Mhm.
situation. And hence why I picked the title Life After Breath, as many people today are feeling breathless and feeling like our upper respiratory kind of regions are under attack. And that's exactly what happened to me. 3 years old at the time, I have very little recall of my life other than profound transformative experience surrounding this event, and other experiences outside of my body that went after this event. But I was in a car going to a park and a playground. When I got out of the car, my breathing became a lot more belabored, and I just kind of ignored it. And I just wanted to have a fun time in the playground with my family, friends, and siblings that day. It was right before the Jewish high holiday of September of 1993 of Yom Kippur, which Yom Kippur is one of the highest holidays of the Jewish calendar, and I come from the Jewish Orthodox tradition. That's a time where you're kind of taking away all your sins to be able to meet your creator so that you could live a year of health, well-being, prosperity, and go into the book of, the book of the good, so to speak. So uh, up to my surprise, I was going to meet the creator. It was just a much different version of it than depicted in the religious tradition of it. Um, I decided to go up on a ladder to a slide where each rung in the ladder, my breathing became even more belabored and more difficult. And eventually, on the top of the ladder, I began to suffocate. And every part of my body was, due to deprivation of oxygen, began shutting down, kind of like one power breaker at a time. If you go into your basement, just begin shutting it down, due to the deprivation of oxygen that came as a result of whooping cough. And the last thing that I recalled was that I was able to see my brain through being outside of my body, and I was able to look down on my body, which wasn't responding. And when I looked into my brain, I was able to understand each component of my brain and the different functionality. Bear in mind, I was 3 years old. I didn't go to Harvard, neuro program, whatever. I'm not Dr. Eben Alexander, who works in neurosurgery, stuff like that. I had no prior knowledge of it, but they truly say use maybe 10 to 15% of your brain. Well, I could fully understand that it would be quite very difficult to understand the brain with the brain. So when I was outside my body, I had a lot more higher sensory and awareness that I would have had at 3 years old, or even today sitting here in front of you, no matter how much education that I had. And as I noticed my brain, I noticed that it was slowly beginning to shut down to the deprivation of oxygen. And then within a moment, I felt as if a plug was taken or yanked out of a wall, and then literally my brain just literally just snapped in half, and I felt a large cracking sound within my brain. It was just a loudest sound, as if my brain literally just cracked in half. And as the saying goes, my brain cracked open, and that's when God came in. Literally, that happened to me. And as my brain cracked open, in the car ride, I noticed this vortex that was in the corner periphery of my eye that I just kind of ignored. But this vortex, or this kind of like vacuum of energy, just went into me about a million miles an hour. And I noticed that I was going on an infinite ride upwards and upwards till no beginning, no middle, no end. And I was just, rising and rising to infinity. And I was, able to sense vibrations and sounds. And I was going, into a journey within, past darkness. And I was able to really ascend into the light realm. And as I was going into the light realm, I noticed the right side of my head, I was able to become aware of this divine heavenly palace, which instantaneously the light was so profound and so climactical that I almost had to shield myself, that it was just so potent. And as I peered in and looked a little bit, closer, I was able to be aware of sounds and vibrations, as well as, angels within this divine palace. And instantaneously, I knew that I was looking at a depiction, to the best to describe it as God. And, to me, it was just as if I was looking at one of the domains or the houses of God within that moment on the right side of my brain while I was at the top of the slide. And then instantaneously, I had awareness of a comforting feeling of this Christ consciousness. And bear in mind, Jesus was born a Jew. Can't say he died a Jew because I don't believe anyone ever dies. Never mind him. But I wasn't taught that at all within my family. Wasn't educated. Quite contrary, that's in the Jewish tradition. It's almost shunned in the sense of what happened, with Christ's name, and a lot of the pogroms and the Crusades and stuff like the Crusades that came after in his name, and just the war that came against Jews after his death, and just the attacks that came. So in the Jewish tradition, that's not something that we talk about regularly, and we tend to bury that a little bit. But I was feeling quite fearful as to, what my parents would think, and, what, dying and what that would mean to them and leaving them behind. And instantaneously, I was enveloped in this warm sense of infinite love within this consciousness. And it was the most just familiar sensation. It was if it was almost kind of like a whisper or vibration or incredibly high vibration of the other side. And when I was in this vibration of Christ consciousness, it wasn't that Jesus was in front of me or the man depicted in the Bible, was kind of in front of me. It was more of a deeper level, just this infinite awareness. And I was able to see just kind of like a brown and gold kind of color while I was into this. And then that kind of segued me, into the top of the slide, where I was able to go down, and I noticed to the right and to the left side of me, my spiritual guides were pushing my body down the slide, and they were using their energetic force field to push me down. And to the right and to the left side of me, I knew instantaneously that I had a male and female guide with me, and my spiritual guides, I knew their name and every little thing about them. And as if I was just looking at the core part of myself, and I forgot, that core part. It was just the most inner core part of who I was and what I was about, and the most intimate connection with my deeper part of my soul. Um, and as my guides were pushing me down, I was able to just notice just how beautiful they were, and I was just in awe of their magnificent light, and they were just massive beings to the two sides of me, and it just was the most blissful experience. I just have a very hard time putting into words.
Do you remember their names? You knew it at
Looking
the
back on
time.
it, there are some details of my near-death experience that slip my own memory, and that's one of them. At times when I get quiet, I'm able to hear voices and hear their presence and even
Yeah,
names. But
yeah,
but when you're on the other side, it's all truth, all knowing. And then when you come back, at times there's some parts of the near-death experience that I, I even can't explain, that are buried a little bit, and some of the finer details aren't necessarily there, but in the sense, how they looked and their perception, for some odd reason, that didn't necessarily stick with me, to be transparent. But throughout my lifetime, I know of their presence, I feel them, I sense them, their energy, but their exact names and what they look like isn't as sharp,
yeah,
and just in terms of understanding, as
yeah.
it was in my near-death experience.
It's not
Um,
important anyway, just as long as they're there. I just was curious because you said you knew
yeah,
it when
yeah,
you were in there, if you carried that forward.
yeah. But there's a little bit of amnesia with some of the elements of it. But the one thing that wasn't amnesiac was the angels that were in front of me. For some odd reason, I have a much easier time remembering what they looked like. That image stuck with me, and I was able to carry that over 20 years later. I'm age 30 right now, born in 1990, the year of the metal horse. So the angels were right in front of me as my body was lying there flatlined. And as the angels were in front of me, I was able to see a sea of angels. There was about countless, almost infinite amount of angels, and these angels were, childlike angels. They were like cherubim, and they were very youthful in their presentation. And again, they were also this gold and brown color that was right in front of me. And they were a lot more macro focused, not as much micro. The spirit guides are very focused on myself, whereas the angels were more focused on the planet and just the energy field that I was in, and just they were just very much, they didn't have like an identity or just a differentiation. They were all just kind of uniformal in their presentation, and they were just there, just kind of sending healing energy. And I was looking, because my body was on the ground, but I had a form that I felt like my spiritual body to the side of my physical body, which was my real form. And I was able to look at them, and in moments I just almost had to pinch myself, because it just seemed just so surreal that these angels were literally right in front of me. I was able to look at them, and it was just
Did
a contrast.
what was your form like? Did you have the same form as a human? Were you an orb, or do you know how did you sense yourself when you're
I
out?
just felt almost kind of like a shadow of energy that I had around me. I wasn't able to like look at myself, but I was able to be aware of this kind of shadow, energetic structure that I had, and just kind of like this field that I still was, but I wasn't able to look, in myself. I was able to look at my body, but I was able to be aware of this kind of form that I had and just this presence that I carried. But I wasn't able to look at myself. But you know, when these angels were there, I was able to listen to their, pitch and their sound, and I understood their essence, and it was just so profound and so beautiful. It was literally right in front of me. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't just, I was just hearing things. It was everything in front of me, more profound than any sensory input that you have on this earth. And then instantaneously, I was aware of the people that I went to in the park, in the playground, and them calling my name. And I saw that they were looking at my body, and I was looking at my body, and I was like, this is not me. I'm here, and they weren't able to see me or hear me. It was very, very frustrating, being able to hear them and see them, and they couldn't see you. It was quite torturous. It almost felt like a caged animal in the zoo just trying to communicate. And, you could see people, but they couldn't see or hear you in a way. It was just very, very difficult. But I was looking at them. I was able to have a lot more awareness than I would at the age of 3 years old, just in terms of intuitive capabilities and understanding their thoughts and being able to see what they were thinking, what they were feeling, and awareness far beyond the physical body. I was able to look at their auric field and their colors, and was able to become aware, a lot more aware of their true nature, of that of a spiritual being, with different purposes and different missions and different karmic ties within this lifetime, and understanding, them just very much transparent. Then, moments later, I was able to see my um, spiritual family or soul family that came into the distance. And some of these faces, after my near-death experience, I was able to become aware of, and I never even met them, from encountering them. But they were able to come to me, and between my angels and my soul family, and the higher entities, I was posed a question as to what was I going to do within my decision? Was I going to stay and, continue, living on the other side, or was to continue my life as, 3-year-old Jake at the time? And so I just posed a question as to, if I do stay, what will come out of this lifetime? Because in a way, it didn't hurt to ask. Ask and
Yes.
you shall receive, as they say.
Mhm.
Because I knew whatever decision I make, that was going to be the decision. All right, there was non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Move one way and move the other way. That's it. And I wanted, in that moment, I have to kind of make a split decision. I wanted to really have a better understanding, and instantaneously, I was able to view the planet, and I was able to see an overlay of the other side of the planet. And I was able to go over different parts of the world that I had different lifetimes with, and just, you know, like fly at infinite rates from one country to another country, and understanding different lifetimes. And a lot of different lifetimes came to me that I speak about more in Life After Breath. Some of the details were a lot sharper, I'm sure, in my near-death experience, but some details still stuck with me. And the most, recent lifetime that was strongest, that I, even as a child, had nightmares of, or experiences of, was a lifetime in which I committed suicide, and I was a teacher of a lot of students, and I took my own life. And in that moment, I was seeing flashing imagery of not only the life that I lived, but different lifetimes that I lived. But the strongest recollection that I had was the different students that I saw in that lifetime, and their faces just coming to me within that moment, and how instantaneously I just had a deep, profound karmic tie, to the different students of that lifetime.
Is
And
this why you got into past life regression? Because you,
yeah, certainly we could get a little bit more into that, but this was certainly a big impetus behind that.
sure, sure.
And then, I was given flashing imagery of the life that I would live. And then I saw, myself teaching in front of a countless crowd of people. and being a teacher, and a healer. And, it wasn't that I felt like I was some pompous guru and I was, better than the people that I was speaking to or on a higher plane, not at all. But the fact that I was a part of this message, I was a part of this energy, I was part of this group, and this continual vantage point as a teacher and bringing the upper etherical wisdom, of the hereafter to the here now. And I said that as beautiful as the heavenly dimension is, and the palace of God is, and Christ consciousness and angels and spiritual guides are, I know that those will always be there. But this unique window to integrate, the hereafter to the here now isn't going to be there as I know it, as 3-year-old Jake. And I said, I can't deny this. And as beautiful as this is, I will continue this life path and this soul mission within this body. And I said that I will agree. And then instantaneously, all the celestial mystical beings on the other side, slowly were beginning to leave me and leave my awareness, except for my spiritual guides. And again, I posed a question as to how do I know that this will happen? How do I know that this is a guarantee that I will reach this pedestal as a teacher and be able to impact people? And, the message that I got was really the power of thought and the power of perception. And the higher vibratory, your thoughts are, the bigger, the more imparallel they are with with your soul's path in a way. And so I was left with that kind of lesson, thoughts kind of in a way of your highway of your lifetime, the different roads and different destinations that you will take. And once I had that realization, I was woken up on a hospital bed, and I was aware of my mother who was there, and the dominant emotion that I had was just this continual confusion as well as intensified anger. And why I say anger is I had so much inside of myself that I couldn't express. And I looked at my mother and I looked at the world in such a different way that I couldn't express, but it was there internally. And the fact that I was able to just have my world rocked, and I couldn't look at people around myself the same, and it was just such a contrasting field to be in the heavenly dimensions and then on this cold hospital bed. It was just so much emotion that literally my mother told me that I got up and I ran around the room like a day or two later, and I kicked my doctor in the leg because I was so angry, and I had such unresolved trauma and anger from that experience. My mother had no idea why I had this anger, and looking back on it as a therapist, I could really understand how trauma works and just the contrasting, energy that happened between that experience and, waking up in a hospital bed and not being able to express myself. And that kind of manifested itself as a lot of anger, which lasted, throughout my childhood and adolescence and young adulthood, was this, dominant characteristic of anger. And,
So you have a lot of personal insight on these things that really can help people, and you understand. That's wonderful.
yeah,
It's a wonderful gift they gave you. In a way, I mean, near-death experiences aren't easy. When they happen,
sure.
they're very confusing. But once you understand what was going on and get more clarity, they do feel like a gift. Do you feel like it's a gift now?
I look at anything as our own perception. We could look at a gift as a curse, right? And so I think you make a wonderful point that everyone focuses on the, glorified elements of a near-death experience. Not enough conversation and dialogue is on, you know, what comes of it, the struggle, in a sense that I don't view death as something to fear, but dying, that process, was quite challenging. Suffocating was the most traumatic experience that I had in this body. I mean, that was, I don't want to sugarcoat it, that was quite scary. And one of the most isolating experiences that I had of just, intensified pain. It was the most finite experience, but looking at the eyes of finite, I was able to see past the shadow, the infinite light. And that's something that I really gathered through my near death experience, and just the illusion of finite suffering, and how, minuscule that is, and how at the end of the day, in order to sometimes, see the light, we have to look first at the darkness and see the light that's eternal
Mhm.
behind it. As anyone who's been through any transformative experience, and and I think in a way that was the most liberating element, where yes, that's temporary, yes, that's painful, but it's just so fleeting. It's got nothing. It's, it just goes like that. And so at the end of the day, it's infinite light, but there's no time, there's no space, there's no beginning, no middle, no end. And for me, that was the most liberating feeling, where I was back to this place where there was the most certainty of the eternity that I was. And we could think of eternity, but you can't process it through the finite mind. We could hear it and it could go through one ear, not the other. But I think really, to understand infinite, we have to be able to find the vantage point that's able to understand it, which is the soul. And that's why I view meditation as a deep way to formulate greater intimacy with understanding infinite intelligence and infinite consciousness.
Mm, exactly. Exactly. Perfect point.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, there was I grew up in a house of four children, and we had all our needs met, upper middle class. Parents were very diligent, hardworking. My father was a therapist. But out of all four children, I mean, you could ask anyone who knew my family. We grew up in a small, very supportive Orthodox Jewish community that valued tradition, religion, community support, and values and ethics. But I was by far the biggest, what stir in my family. I was a very difficult child, and I think so much of that happened from my near-death experience, where internally I kind of had an understanding of what was going on, but externally I wasn't able to communicate it. And it was very hard for me to just be playing the game when I was able to see past it, and, past, just how people are seeing me as a blank slate, and seeing parents and teachers as all omnipotent and all omnipresent, where in a way I felt older and wiser than, people who were much older than myself, so it was very hard, to be parented, and I was quite defiant against the process and just the reintegration of it.
So did you tell your parents at all about this when it happened, or just
No,
well, you
in a
couldn't because you
sense,
couldn't explain it. You didn't even have
that,
the verbiage.
the biggest trigger of anger that I had was that clear cognitively, I knew that my parents would have no idea what I had. They weren't privy to it. There were people who really believed in religion, tradition, and almost kind of like the afterlife of the Jewish God. They embraced the here now more so than the hereafter. They weren't someone for rainbows, sunshines, and unicorns, stuff like that. And so for myself, I didn't want to share it because, words were limiting. It was very
Mhm.
hard to do it. And I just knew at the time I wouldn't be able to express it, or that I wouldn't be believed. And so um, I kept it private from them for over almost 25 years, was when I first started. Um, about 2 years ago, about a year or two ago, I had for the first time, like a full sit down conversation. And there were smaller details that I wasn't necessarily aware of. For instance, if you look back in an old interview that I've done, I would say I was maybe 4 or 5 years old when I had this experience, because a part of me just felt like it was like a second ago. Like it didn't feel like it was 3 years old. And then the therapist part of me was like, how is it possible to have such clear memory at the age of 3 years old or 4 years old? So I would, throw a number. I thought maybe 4 or 5 was as far back as we could go back in our memory. My mother told me that no, I was 3 years old when I had it. And so a part of me knew that, but publicly, I just didn't have the confidence to really validate that as a reality. And so to my surprise, it was a lot more, in a way, it was healing, and as well as, eye-opening to some degrees, and validating some of the conversation that we had, years later.
Yeah, I didn't tell my parents for, gosh, 30 years, 40 years. I don't know. So I mean, I told them when I was writing the book. And they believed me in absolutely. But I live so far away from them. It's a conversation you have in person, not over the telephone anyway. So yeah, we all carry it a long time till we understand it. And it's always a process of understanding too.
Yeah, and then there's a part of us that holds this near and so dear to our heart, that in a way, we just get incredibly selective with who we share it to because it's the most prized moment of our lifetimes. It's the most sacred moments of our lifetimes. And part of me just didn't want to tell anyone. I just wanted to hold it in. I didn't want to tell anyone. I wanted it, to myself and just kind of buried deep within. But, in a way, throughout kind of like, my later infancy and childhood, in order to almost thrive, I had to push it away. I had to bury it. It was, kind of like this beach ball that I had to push under the water because I don't know about you, but I was just so much more comfortable. And I talk about in Life After Breath and crossing over to the other side. And after having this experience, my brain was so transformed from suffocation and
Absolutely.
just kind of snapping in half that the filter between the two realms was wide open. I was regularly able to have higher consciousness and conversations with God, not to quote Neil Donald Walsh's book, but you know what I'm saying. And
Yeah.
I was always having inner dialogue with higher consciousness that I speak a little bit more in Life After Breath. It wasn't until one experience when I was in the bathroom and usually in the bathroom was when I would go into these higher consciousness dialogues, and get very quiet in private moments, in preschool and early childhood. But one moment I was trying to cross over to their side like I was, almost on a regular basis, within infancy. And then literally my soul's urge was blocked and I wasn't able to cross over. And almost in a way that was a rejection to a redirection where I was here to kind of be within this body, within this time frame. And that crossing over there almost was if like, what's the point of being in this body if I'm hanging out there, if I feel more comfortable there
Mhm.
than going here? And so I was taught that I had to kind of ground myself. And one of the biggest anchors that I speak about in Life After Breath was athletics and sports. And I got very much into sports. And sports was one of the ways that I was able to feel just kind of unified with my classmates and just relatable. And I
Mhm.
think that's certainly something that countries can experience who have division. And it's just the ultimate unifying force. But it's also a great grounding force. And I got very just all consumed in sports. It was my greatest savior, and then later in life, it was also my greatest savior to come back to this because once I tore my hamstring in my later teens, early 20s, it's almost kind of like you had to take me off the sports field, the tennis courts, and the baseball field. And once I tore this, was when I had no choice but to find deeper gears of myself to start to visit. And, once that happened, I got back into, deep spiritual practices and I got this, that was transformative for myself. So sports was a saving grace to get grounded and then to connect myself to the other, to other higher realms too, from in many ways. So it was my great anchor and a great uplifter. So.
So you've had the after effect that you can still communicate with them. Have you had any other after effects?
Absolutely. I mean, and I speak about within my near death experience. I mean, not my near death experience, but my book, Life After Breath. In my early 20s, I was practicing, Eastern, kind of philosophies and yogic practices and stuff like that. And so there's more of like an Eastern Asian kind of twist on, yoga where it implemented Tai Chi and Qigong. So I was very much practicing a lot of these, energetic practices, and I almost just became so obsessed the deeper I got into them, the more I was able to feel. Where one day, ironically, in September, September is just my month. I woke up literally out of my body, and for about 3 or 4 weeks, I had an out of body experience. And then this moment, this experience, I just was able to feel just so much more that I felt in my whole lifetime, just in terms of my energy centers and my elements of fire and water, and it was just a crazy experience. And I speak about this as well as my reunification with my animal totem that was just so clear. And this wasn't something that I was just kind of thinking in my head; it was just a direct experience, and I was able to leave my body and be able to be privy to the one strand of energy around myself that I experienced in a synagogue, ironically, around the Jewish high holiday times. And so I had an awakening or an awareness or an enlightening experience that happened, almost 20 years later from my near-death experience that really allowed me to remind myself of the one soul energy that we all are, that
Mhm.
connects us all. And how sometimes we get very egocentric and just very boxed in within our own body and within our own identities that separate ourselves from that. And so it's one thing to read in a book or to listen to a workshop and hear that word one. It's another thing to see it evidentially in front of you. But interdimensionally, I have a lot of awareness of events that premonitional kind of stuff that came to me as a child and young adult, particularly when someone is about to pass away. I would just you know I would just kind of see the person, but then there's this whole other radio dial of information that's coming into me, very subtly. And it's almost like when that event happens, I just kind of see it. And one of those events in my book I speak about was 9/11, when I visited the towers. And there's just kind of like this overlaying emotion that I was aware of, as well as people who passed in my life, just kind of tragically, and just being aware of it. And when it just happened, I just had this insane deja vu. Like I knew, like I've seen that before. And the dominant force that I had was just anger, just in terms of ignoring that, and just the annoyance of it, where things would happen to me in my life and I would just see those before. And at the time, as a child, you don't have the term psychic. To me, it was just very annoying, where it's just almost kind of like you would have these events and see them in front of you, and you just see them before they happened. And it was just like I didn't have a word for it, much like I had from my near-death experience. It was just kind of like this annoying voice that I had that was almost kind of like scary in a way. Um, so yes, psychic intelligence and awareness of future events was very strong. And at times as a young adult, and that comes to me, especially when I'm a lot more relaxed.
Hmm. Hmm. I can relate to that too. I had psychic abilities afterwards too, and I didn't know what they were. Just
Yeah,
so it didn't. I finally eventually took a class on mediumship, so that made a lot more sense. So.
yeah. I think part of it is when you're having these experiences, you're just processing it through your own filter. And so when you're able to get direction, education, and universality behind your experiences, it becomes a lot less stressful, a lot less kind of like an emotional reaction. But when you're having these experiences as a young child, it just becomes very overwhelming when you're not
Oh,
able to just understand it or label it.
yeah.
To me, it was more of a burden than anything else. It was just a nuisance.
Hmm.
So I just kind of buried that, for quite some time, because I just wanted to live my life and not have everything that I saw, happen to fruition.
Hmm.
It just almost kind of felt like I wasn't living. I was just seeing the past in a way. I wasn't, living in the future going forward, the
Hmm.
present going forward.
So you
So
kind of had to pack it away so that you could get on
yeah,
with your life. Yeah,
yeah, it
that's
was more of a
that's
burden
normal.
than anything else. Yeah.
Hmm. So and so you're a Reiki master. That's awesome, and hypnotherapist,
Right.
and you do past life regression. Is there a reason you do past life regression? Is it to eliminate carryover, or um, people are just interested in it, or is it a healing process for something that they have here that
Yeah.
they're trying to let go of?
Well, there's many different ways. I mean, I certainly work as a psychotherapist, and I feel with clients, when I'm working to a certain degree, and we get them so far and they're still hitting walls, I want to make sure that I don't shortchange my clients, and just in terms of the eclectic array of tools that they're able to utilize. And so, in a way, I did that for that reason. But also, there's many different, kind of, motivations and impetuses of my trainings that I had. But I think one of it was one of the, you know, questions that people have, and they just get so frustrated with it, where they want the answer right here, right now, as to what is my soul's purpose. And for so many people, people confuse soul's purpose and ego's purpose. Where in a
Mhm.
sense that, for most of us, we're not very in tune with our soul. We're in tune with our ego. We're in tune with this, just kind of like finite body and finite personality that we've developed in this lifetime, and that's come through, with schools and parents, but it hasn't come through so much from listening organically to the deeper, waters of our true essence. And so, I think really the ultimate education point that I have within my life's purpose and and my worldview was within my near-death experience. And so past life regression was my way of, helping people that they don't necessarily need to die to really have deeper connectivity to higher consciousness, truth, and reality of their souls, drive their soul's mission. And so I think, from understanding different lifetimes, we could get a better understanding of some of our greater gifts, talents, as well as, ways that we can integrate that, from, various different walks of life. And it just give people a greater extent of awareness, far beyond the ego, this body, and this limited, depiction that we have of the totality of who we are. And I think how we see ourselves in this body is just so limited with the totality of our soul. It's, just 1 or 2 pages of an infinite encyclopedia. And I think the more tools and clues that we're able to, develop and integrate, the more that we're able to be expanded within our own awareness of, what it is that we're here to learn within this Earth School and what we're here to kind of bring, forward, and how we can make the most impact within this lifetime is not just something to serve the ego and the temporary, um, limited view of how we perceive ourselves, but rather to really connect with not how we see ourselves, but who we truly are.
Yeah, truly, I really live over and over again. I remember 2 past lives. I didn't go into all the ones that you went into, but I do remember 2 past lives, and so I know they do happen. Whether they're past lives or parallel lives, I have no idea, but I know they are there. So it's a fascinating subject, I think,
Right.
anyway.
I use the term past life because I agree with you. There, when you go to the other side, I don't know about you, there's no past, present, future. It's all
No,
just one continuing moment. And so I use the term past just for people to like understand in a way and kind of distinguish. But I'm right there with you. It's all one lifetime, And so people ask me, when's your next book coming, right? And I would say there's one book. It's just in different segments. And I would say really there's one lifetime. It's just, in a way chopped up differently. But when you get past the superficiality of it, it's just all one energy. Because, in a way, we think that's an ending when the body goes, but we are eternal. There's no possible ending. We don't die. We don't go anywhere. Yeah, we might evolve, and learn more lessons. But at the end of the day, we're timeless beings. There's no beginning, middle, end. We are eternal. We come from eternity, and who we are is that spark of divinity. And so we can't view the divine as having a time, right? Imagine what life was like before God, or what life was like before, that we can't. Always is and always ever was. And
oh,
that's
yeah,
the way that I see the soul, right?
exactly. And speaking of that, I happened to be by my dad sitting by my dad when he passed. He was laying in the bed, and he had known I was there previous, because I had come back from a trip to see him when I heard the news that he was um, going to be passing soon. So I rushed back, and I had fallen asleep because I'd traveled 17 hours to get there. And for some unknown reason, I woke up and had a sense that I was supposed to um, take movies. And so I started taking movies of him, and I was thinking, I could watch his breath. And on the so in the fourth video, I believe it was the fourth video, I happened to catch his last exhale of breath. And when that happened, there was an energy that left his body, and it just quickly went to the right, like whipped out. And the thing is, he was in an interior room with no windows. There was no car, no street that went by that room. The window was in my mom's room, which was a separate room, and the shades were closed. There was no television on in his room at the time, no electrical equipment on in his room at the time, except for being plugged into the bed. So that was his spirit that left his body. And it's amazing how when I slowed down the video to see if it was, get a better look at it, it changed direction. So he had whipped out of his body in one direction and went the other direction to see my mom, who was laying in a bed, because they were both dying at the same time. Mom died 9 days later, but he had went initially to see her. I thought it was absolutely amazing. That's on my YouTube channel. So that proves that we are energy, just like you said, we're energy that continues on.
Absolutely. And you know what's amazing is that moment when the soul leaves the body and just what happens, within the physical room, and and even phenomenon that people are having, is this, growing phenomenon is a shared death experience where, a pet, the body leaves, or the, the a family member goes and people join them and they literally leave their bodies and and their identities behind and join them as they go to the other side. And you ask Raymond Moody, what is he most impressed by? He'll tell you shared death experiences to him just blow him away, because in the way your body is fully functioning, nothing's obstructed, nothing's happening, but you just leave it behind as if you're almost dead too. And it's not operating and you just leave out of it to join someone else's journey.
Yeah.
And so that moment is quite profound. But in a way, it's people are really able to capture the gates of the other side wide open for that person's, next, just kind of rebirth period, in life after life period, as Raymond would say. But and just the soul, the clear understanding that the soul has form, and for you to capture that on photography and to see that there is, really it does validate that there is a form of who we are. um, I always say for people to better understand the soul, meditation is a great way, because just imagine yourself past your thoughts and when you meditate, and imagine you not being you. Imagine like having nothingness, and you can't, right? There's
Yeah.
always that that inner observer, that sacred observer that's always there. And to me, that is the soul, that part of us that's just processing life in a very deep level, beyond the surfaces of the water, beyond the thought energy, emotional energy. It's a very deep surface. And, I think the more that people connect to that deep part of themselves, they recognize that it's virtually impossible for that to be taken away. You
Right.
could
Right.
lose the brain, you could lose the thoughts, you could lose all that could be taken. But it's, the more that people meditate, the more they'll be able to understand the eternity of the soul, that observer can never be removed. You
Mhm.
just can't imagine life without that.
Yeah. If you
It's
think about it, you looked down on your body and it was dying. And I looked down on my body and I was dying, but yet we still had the memories, we still had the thoughts. So if you really think about it, it's it's us talking. It's us as spirit that is talking. It's because it's our consciousness that motivates this body forward.
right,
And so we are actually talking spirit to spirit.
right. When we are like fully present, fully aware, I think that's when we can remember things. How are we supposed to remember something when we have 1 to 2%, if anything, of our brain functioning? How does that work? Right? You
Yeah.
should be completely remember nothing, almost as if you're going under anesthesia and asking if you remember what happened under anesthesia. There's nothing you could hold on to. And so for us to be able to remember this, it just tells you so much about the brain and just the old scientific medical paradigm of the brain producing consciousness, but rather the brain is a filter between consciousness of the two realms. And something that the body and the brain is just a filter for the soul's existence, and just temporarily housing it. But that's just something so profound in near-death experience, to have profound experience, far surpassing anything as climactical, as present as we are in this physical body, with it not working. How is that possible? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. It's funny, when I filmed the video of my dad leaving his body for YouTube on my YouTube channel. Um, if you watch the video on a computer screen or even a large tablet screen, you can see it too. But just as I say his name, there's a little orb that flies down into the corner of the film, and I know that was my dad that had come to let it be known that he was still alive in this
yeah,
energetic. It was absolutely fab. Just as I said his name, Dick. So he.
yeah. It's just so funny. About 2 weeks ago, a friend of mine was reading Life After Breath, and they were on the chapter where one of the chapters I speak about my grandfather. And as she's reading it, she and her husband simultaneously go up to each other and say, "Do you smell aftershave?" And they like, there's a strong smell of aftershave.
Mhm.
And they're like, "Why are we never smelled this before. We just moved into this home. Why are we smelling it? It's nighttime. I might have shaved maybe this morning, but why would that be lingering?" And so in a way, that was my grandfather saying hello. He comes from the Old Spice generation and
Oh,
that kind
yeah,
of era. And, with
absolutely.
him, he's always around. That aftershave is around. But also, when he died, well, not died, but when he left his body, the last thing that I did for him was shave him and smash some, like, aftershave on
Ah,
him. That was the last act that I did to him to make him kind of clean in a way before. I didn't know that was going to be the last time, but that was the last act. So in a way, that's spirit's way of saying hello,
yes,
that message of aftershave, shaving, and
yeah,
but the fact that they both said that to each other was very validating, about spirit's messages and stuff like that.
yeah, that's absolutely fabulous because they do keep communicating with us in different ways, and that's exactly one of the ways that they do. So, yeah,
Yeah,
perfect, absolutely perfect.
yeah,
So,
signs and symbols of, that love never ends and love is eternal,
yeah, yeah,
between souls. So
yeah. So, well, that's this. Your story is absolutely uh, fascinating, and I have read your book. I highly recommend it to the listeners, and I am so grateful that you shared your fantastic account with us today. Now I have a message to give to the audience, and while I give that message, please think of the last message that you'd like to give to the audience, and then I'll come back to you. And for my listeners, I have one item to mention before we go, and I'm working on a second book that will feature the rest of my story, the interesting spiritual adventure of my parents during their trek toward eternity. And I'm offering segments of my book to people who have had a spiritual encounter that don't intend to write a book. I have found experiencers find another level of healing when they have an avenue to share their stories, because often they have these experiences like I did, and I wanted to share my story, but I didn't want to write a book. But I finally got a message from God that I had to write a book and I had to speak about it. And so that's why I did it. You don't say no to God. So I want to offer this healing through portions of my book. So if anybody had a spiritual experience and would like to contact me, we will talk. And if it fits into my book, I will get it in my book. And who knows, you may be one of my guests on my YouTube channel. So now let's go back to Jacob. Again, Jacob, thank you for being here. Is there any additional message that you'd like the audience to have before we head out?
absolutely. I think the important thing is to never judge your story. For many years, I sat into a place of who will listen to me? Why is this important? Who will believe me? But ultimately, it's not, I don't think life is about ourselves so much as it's about the ripple effect of our lives and the impact that it has, on others. And I think that's the ultimate collateral where when we're gone, we can't take our bodies with us, our houses, our 401ks, whatever. But we can take with us was the ripple effect of our existences and who or what it impacted. And you just never know, like I said, Janet, with your own power of story. And I always say, within psychotherapy, so many people these days are just ruminating about their own stories and just kind of what happened to them 20, 30 years ago and just never getting past it. And so I think ultimate freedom is not being defined by a story, but learning how to define your story and learning. I think one of those tools is to get strength, is to find wisdom, lessons, understanding. And I think that way, if you're able to cultivate it to that regard, you'll be able to reach someone who might be going through something similar than you. Because I ultimately feel that this earth is a school, but it's also a school for us to be spiritual guides and angelic guides when we go to the other side. And ultimately, by being able to be empowered from our stories, we're able to reach others who might be in different parts of the highway that we've moved on from, to let them know of different potholes and different terrains so they could go through it through a little bit more wisdom, grace, and ease. So they don't have to go through all the heartache and unnecessarily, turbulence, that they didn't necessarily need had they had that wisdom and understanding that they're accessible to utilize and integrate.
No, that's a fantastic message. So thank you again for being here. And I'll get this on YouTube and we'll have a great time.
Thank you
And
so
be
much.
careful with your
for having
driving.
me.
I know you're in a snowstorm, so be careful.
Yeah, coming tomorrow, but thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you
Okay.
for having me on as an honored guest.
Oh, thank you, Jake. I appreciate you being here. All right. Bye, everyone.